Failed summer destinations. Yes, you can start.
All right. Lovely. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to day 11 of the series that we are in. We've made a good amount of progress already 25 days, 25 skills, of which 10 days are done, and we are on the 11th day. You are here with me, Garima, the founder of Authenticity, and Preethi Sunallinii, who's the founder of I Integrated Parenting. Preethi brings with herself a lot of wisdom in the therapy space. She's a family therapist and a parenting coach, also someone who's done a lot of work in the teachers training space. And I personally have worked in the integrated marketing communication space and am now moving towards this space of learning, teaching, and infusing emotions into everything that we do. Teaching is such a joyful profession, but if we bring in more metaphors, more memory, and more emotions into the whole curation of how we go out in the world with it, the magic happens. But the way you curate and weave all of this together is in the form of stories. We all go back in our childhood, and there will be some really beautiful lessons, beautiful sessions that we hold very close to our heart that tell a story to us. And as me and Preeti were doing a back end discussion on this topic, something really amazing, caught our attention. How is it that we think? How is it that we store any sort of memory? The moment you say the word red, we either think of red cherries or a red apple or maybe a red umbrella or the Red Riding Hood, right? It's the color in itself only has meanings when I visualize it in different situations. Similarly, any kind of numeric, say the number two, I'll think of two apples now, maybe two cherries and two umbrellas, right? But the number two in itself does not have any significance unless there's a visual aid attached to it. And that's what stories do in learning, be it at any stage, more so in the primary learning stage, but as even when you grow up as adults. It's your story that you carry very dearly throughout, and it is your story that you need to work on and change over a period of time to be more empowered. And today, that's all that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the power of storytelling as a tool in teaching, and what are the pitfalls or gray areas that we may be mindful of. Also, when we are talking about stories, yes, there are certain subjects and certain concepts that lend themselves to storytelling very easily, but there are more complex and meticulous themes and subjects that may be relatively more challenging to turn into a storytelling session. So, how do we tackle all of that? And how do we weave the complex concepts and bring them alive for our learners from time to time? So with this, I introduce to you Preeti, and I'll get her to come in and tell us more about the subject per se, not only in terms of the power of storytelling. That's something that we're going to unpack, but what role has stories played in her learning journey maybe. So Preeti, would you like to share something of that with us?
Absolutely. So, in fact, one of the things that caught my eye when you said, there are some subjects that easily lend themselves to stories, while others are, not that easy, right? One of the things that people usually talk about is, how you're going to say, differentiation and integration and algebra. What kind of
Mm.
stories are you going to bring in there? And right there, I want to share. It was my physics teacher in my 10th. I remember she had spoken about, I think, rocket launching. We were studying about rocket fuel and the structure of the rocket and yada, yada,
Like
yada.
literally rocket science.
Yes, literally rocket science. And I remember that she explained how, in the use of the rocket fuel, it is not the first bit or the second bit or the third bit. There is a certain amount of fuel that needs to get burned, and there is a graph, like more it gets used at a certain point, there is enough pressure built in for it to actually take off. And on the other side, something that all of us experience every day, watching plants. right? You're watering your plants every day. First day nothing
Mm-hmm.
happens, second day nothing happens, maybe first week nothing happens, and then you see a small spark. And every day there is, there are some days you can see a visible 1 inch, 2 inch growth, and there are days that just looks like there is hardly any growth. But overall, if you want to look at how long it has taken for a plant to grow, let's say in 6 months, the day one plus day two plus day three plus day four is not a linear graph, right? It is a different kind of addition. That is the process of integration, is how that's how she explained what integration is. And I can tell you till today that it's etched in my mind. Right?
Right,
So,
right.
like you said, it's I'm sure it was not easy to find a story, but for somebody who really loves the subject, we of course go into where am I going to apply this, right?
Correct.
Questions that we would, especially if you work with teenagers, adolescents who find it hard to be interested in studies. A constant question that you're likely to get is, why am I even
How
studying
am I
this?
going to use this? Yeah, yeah.
How is this going to, it's just teachers are out to get me. They just want to torture us. They just want to
Correct.
suck out all the life and joy out of my life. That's why they're giving me such shitty subjects. That's pretty much what you hear. Right? The thing is, if we give them a why is this important? What does this
Yeah,
relate to?
yeah.
That makes a whole lot more sense to now be interested in the subject. Right?
Correct.
I remember, I don't know, I think it was a teacher who had shared, like 2 mark questions, and there is some diagram of a boy who's throwing a ball, and he's throwing at a certain angle and this distance, how far does it go, something something, find x, right? This is the last section of the question paper. And the child had neatly drawn dotted line and said, X, this is where it will
This
fall.
is where it is. Now go, yeah, go fetch it. No, true, true. There was one time my daughter was solving a problem and there was something to do with ice cubes. It's like X many ice cubes she has. Now she has done like person B came, took away these many. It's like, I don't know, but I think it's summertime and they're having a party. Because why are they working with so many ice cubes? Why? Then another time, one of my friend's daughter, she wrote in her paper saying something to do with like ABC is the problem and you solve for it, right? Math problems are generally given to you. It's like, why should I solve other people's problems? It is their problem. Man, these are witty responses. What do you do with this?
Yes, absolutely. So, what I'm trying to say is we need to understand, for us to understand why these things
Yeah.
stick with us, why stories stick with us,
Mm-hmm.
is because the way we have evolved over the centuries, over millennia, is that the
Mm-hmm.
brain is evolved for narratives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any time that I hear a story that involves a person, their emotions, their experiences, is an opportunity for me to catalog my own internal map for future reference, just in case I land in that situation,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the moment it involves an emotion, it involves a storyline, it is easier to now get wired in the brain. See, the brain does not work on facts alone. In
Correct.
fact, for the brain, for the mind, so to say, I think I want to move past the brain and go into the mind. The For the mind, facts don't matter,
Mm-hmm.
right? For many people, their internal voice that says you're stupid, for them, I'm stupid is a fact.
Mm-hmm.
What are facts? What is the truth? Is there a truth? I know I'm going into a little bit of philosophy here. I'm going
No,
to
no,
pull
no, no,
myself
no,
back.
no. But
But the
it's
truth
interesting, yeah.
remains. The truth remains. There is no ultimate reality. There's your reality, there's your truth, there's my truth, there's our truth, and there's the truth. Nobody can fathom what
Correct.
the real
The
truth
truth
is.
is.
And pretty much everything that we know of life is an interpretation of what we've seen, heard, and felt. Right? The subconscious mind stores information in the form of images. Not to say the other senses don't make sense, the other senses are, let's say, complementary, not supplementary, right? For, like the examples that you brought in, the number two, nobody can think of the number two. Show me a number two. Where is number two? You can't find it anywhere. You're probably going to show me two combs or two bottles, but there is no number two. The numbers exist only in language. Similarly, there are many things in life that are abstract like that, which exist only in language, especially so in math. Math is very real. I don't want mathematicians to come up, with arms at me. Yes, math is very real. It helps you to deduce certain things. But where is it out in nature? It's not something that you can, it's not tangible. Right? It's not something that you touch, feel, and experience. It's something that is observed over a period of time. And what you observe over a period of time is denoted with some symbols and pictures, which are numbers and signs and symbols. Right? Math, physics, especially chemistry for that matter. Yes, at least in chemistry, there's more that you're seeing, but still, a lot of it you can't really see with the naked eye, right? And
Correct.
H2O is mixing with NaCl,
Yeah,
salt.
yeah, 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 yeah,
How
yeah.
is it reacting? That's not something that you can literally see with your bare eyes, but you can represent it on paper with
Mm, mm,
symbols, colors, numbers, letters. Now, for the mind to be able to retain this information, just mere facts are very, 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 very hard to process, because to the mind, if there's no emotion involved, it shouldn't matter, right? I care. The mind stores information that it cares about. Say, for example, right now we're sitting here, you're watching me live within this particular box. There are at least about 500 odd message units that are coming through from here, right? Every color that you see in the background, every time
yeah.
I move, every time my hair flies, right? The kind of clothing that I'm wearing, the kind of designs that are there, every bead here is a separate message unit. That is all coming and hitting you. Now, let's say you watched this for half an hour and gone by. If somebody asked you, was the fan on in this room? You have no clue. But let's say you are a photographer, or you're an interior designer, or something that brings your attention to the minute details. Say you're an artist. It's likely that you're looking at this flickering in the background. Maybe it registered. 2 days later, somebody asks, what kind of earrings was Preeti wearing? Unless you're, let's say, into fashion designing, for example, or you're into beauty and makeup and whatever, I don't think it would even cross your mind,
Correct. Correct.
right? So, what is the information that you care about? Is the information that the mind will register. Everything else are facts that are irrelevant. I don't
Correct.
care.
And
It does not reference me. It does not relate to me. That is why it does not get stored. And when we end up putting a whole bunch of numbers on the board and say, tell children, write it and by heart it, wrote it and by. Matlab, it doesn't make sense.
correct.
Why do I have to remember this? That why is the story that we need to give them.
No, and as you talk about it, Preeti, what's coming very clear, that's becoming clearer and clearer for me is the concept of relatability, the concept of being able to see myself in that space. A lot of times we check out of a few conversations or we check out of a lecture because we do not see any relevance and relatability of that
Exactly.
whatsoever in my own world. The fact that there were a few subjects that did not land with me at all are because I'd assumed in that moment that never in my life will I need this complex theorem, right? where am I going to apply it? I'm taking myself back to that um, point that you'd raised earlier. But the fact that, like you're saying, in my adult life, if I'm an architect, I'll look at design a certain way. If I'm a fashion designer, I'm going to look at the whole scene a certain way. If I'm an artist of any other domain, I'll look at it a certain way. um, and that makes me realize the power of storytelling is something that can weave all of this in, that can take me to a world where you can bring all of this alive for me, and for a moment you can make me feel as if this is my own. Because in learning, you learning is very simple, like you'd mentioned in one of our earlier conversations, that we do not there is no linear learning, right? You grasp concepts while it's more so at the primary stage, but even at a as you grow up in life, ultimately of so say for example you and me are having this 30-minute conversation. We know that ultimately people are only going to take away any 3 or 4 points that at some juncture would hit them and make sense to them. Not everything might switch on a bulb in their mind, not everything might seem relevant to them, but at some point of time they would feel, this one, this point,
Something
oh
that
lovely.
relates to their experience.
Correct.
I've seen this. Yes, I know this. Yes, I can relate to this. Oh, I remember this teacher who did that. I remember this child who did that. Things that they can relate to with their experience.
Correct. And that's that point that you made of cataloging information and reference for future reference and stuff like that, right? That's such a fantastic way for us to remember how people are learning, and therefore the importance of not just storytelling, which is a one-way monologue-ish storytelling, but also taking reactions. I was seeing one more thing from a communications lens. Inevitably that's something that just comes into play while you were explaining the concept of this being relatable, the truth coming alive, and stuff like that. And then you saw me go somewhere. My eye movement went some, like when I started thinking of something, she's like, oh, I know it's getting a little philosophical. The point is that consciously, subconsciously, unconsciously, we are sending signals to each other that, am I buying your story or not? Am I relating to your story or not? Am I in your story yet or not? And you know that the moment the person in front of you subconsciously starts nodding or smiling or emoting with you, now you have this person with you.
Absolutely.
So, not just explaining the concept, but purely for the purpose of connection and bonding. We all know the primal human need of being seen, being heard, being acknowledged, sitting in those circles in the olden days with the bonfire and telling stories generation after generation. That's how the wisdom's traveled for the longest period of time. And I think now, as you scientifically unpack this for us, I also realized that how important this whole thing is. It's really fascinating, so to say. So I'd like to now bring in that point that fine, we've established the fact that stories are important and stories are a very efficient and effective way of learning, right? But from a teacher's perspective, there are some intuitive, instinctive storytellers who naturally are great at standing there, emoting with their full body, somatically expressing everything. And then we were talking about these stricter teachers yesterday who had their boundaries strong, and purely because the way you show up, then the discipline and obedience in the class is greater. My point is that um, from a training space perspective, do you think enough importance is given to the concept of storytelling in lesson planning, in overall conduct in the class? Because before I let you come in, I remember the teachers who gave me home assignments that were more project based, that needed me to have that. You remember, all of us would have done those seed project where you've put dampened cotton and put seeds on it and then it grows and you take that small thing to the. So my point is, all of those learnings have stayed with me much longer. I remember there was a teacher explaining the concept of chlorophyll, and she asked me to pluck a leaf and boil it in water and see the green color come out, and all of those things, right? And till date, when I'm making a cup of tea or coffee, that whole dissipation of color and all of those things are fascinating for me and takes me back to the lesson plan. But the point is, in our structured education system, what is the role of storytelling? Do we train our teachers in that sense? Should we train them in that sense? What's the um, training readiness in terms of storytelling? How strongly is this um, tool seen, perceived, and implemented in the training space? What's been your experience in that space?
That's a fantastic question. So, in terms, I think I will have to hear somewhere create a differentiation between mainstream schooling and alternative schooling, right? The whole one of the core reasons for alternative schools and homeschooling and unschooling and Waldorf and Reggio and Montessori and a whole lot of other alternative schools. One of the core principles is to make learning experiential and child led, where
Correct.
there is more activity based learning. Yes, there is a lot of awareness today for activity based learning, but story based learning is not really caught up as much. Also, I think because it's a very unique skill and it's not easy one to learn also because there are not many people who are doing it. Now, I remember many years back, I met this person in a homeschoolers forum who actually does this. He basically brings children together to teach concepts of science and maths out in nature. He takes them on treks on to parks, to local whatever visiting places, and he gets them to understand these concepts by talking about things in nature.
Lovely.
I have never ever met another person like that after that. He was the first and perhaps the last for me. And now I'm trying to think, who was that? I can't even remember his name. And I'll have to go back and look. So what I'm trying to say is while activity-based learning has come up because people have started understanding that for most of our education system, since we've adopted the Macaulay's education system, we've been focused on visual aids and listening aids, meaning somebody who will write, somebody who will talk. That's all our children are looking at, right? You listen to what the teacher's saying, you learn from that, or you see what the teacher's writing, or you see and read what's there in your book, and that's how you learn. Or there is, of course, the rote learning. Now, the mind also remembers experiences that involved more than one or two senses, right? The more number of senses that are involved, the longer is the retention rate.
Retention.
Rather, the higher, not just longer, but higher is the retention rate, right? More experiential it is, the easier it is. So that is why a lot of these alternative modalities will keep looking at creating activity sheets, workbooks, tools, and I don't want to call them toys, but a lot of materials, so to
Learning
speak,
aid, basically. Yeah.
learning aids to help children to experience what they're doing. Um, my most frequent experience is, in my son's school, absorbed by the Montessori school, right? So they have a wide variety of material to teach fraction, to teach length, to teach division. My son, I think by the time he was in first standard, he could, count up to some shit, even I don't remember that. He used Sanskrit words for 1 lakh and 10 lakh and stuff like that, right? So, the way it is taught makes a whole lot of difference,
Difference, correct.
and that is something that a lot of schools are recognizing, and they are bringing in these kind of learning aids, activity based learning aids, right? Now, the adoption of stories as such, my experience and my understanding is it's quite limited. Right? So
Quite
how
limited and sorry, go ahead.
So how can we expand this is when we think of stories, we are in the context of education, we are only thinking of stories for the concept itself.
Mm,
For learning, we also can look into the learning environment. You
correct.
either, what are stories? Stories are basically humanizing something, right? You look at what Pixar has done. What does Pixar do? Everything, it make a, it puts emotions into cars. It puts those emoticons into, I don't know, your bulb and your. What it's simply doing is it's humanizing
The
non-living things,
whole. Mm,
right? So similarly, for us, we can either humanize the subject to make it interesting, or you can humanize the teacher.
mm,
What does that mean? Instead of just focusing on creating stories around subjects, if it's possible, fantastic, right? If you can do that, please do. There is nothing beyond that, right? That helps children, that helps students to understand, let's say, the story behind the scientific discovery, so to say, right? It's more like they're able to connect that to real life application of the science or the math concept that we're trying to teach. Now, in places that are appropriate and
mm.
places where it is difficult to do that, you can always bank on building a connection. Teachers that
Absolutely.
we
Mm,
love, teachers that we
mm.
feel connected to, teachers that we trust, we are always more interested in what they have to say.
Absolutely. Mm, mm, mm,
So, in places where it is possible, share your personal stories as a teacher. I remember my Sanskrit teacher who would talk about her daughter, and she would talk about the things that she did as a child when her father, who was a pandit, used to say a particular Sanskrit words, and then she would give a meaning. And for that, see this part of the word, it comes from here. She would go into the details of this. So if you can humanize the subject, do that. If you can't, humanize yourself, meaning bring out your personal stories. Talk about why this was difficult. I remember my eighth standard math teacher,
mm.
when she started some concept. I don't even remember what concept it was, but when she started it, I remember her saying, "He's like, my God, when I was first introduced to this, I went bonkers. I really could not understand anything my teacher said. So, to help you, I have created some steps to help you understand, to make it easier for you." What is the concept? I still don't remember, but I know for that year, I
Yeah,
was,
because that just that
yeah,
allows you to see her as a human being and know that she's not this superhuman who knows everything, but she's somebody who
exactly.
also struggled with this.
And in that subject, that year, I crossed 97%.
Wow. Mm.
Right? And she taught
What
us
a pity I don't remember what subject and what concept it was because 97 is like really brilliant.
really good number, yes, right? And I was a very below average student, Remember that. That's why I'm giving that number
And
as
that's
like
your
a
story
big
that you
thing.
keep telling
Yes,
me. Yeah.
absolutely, right? So, absolutely. So, humanize the subject or humanize the teacher. Both of
Lovely.
this will
Yeah.
work to bring out stories that stick, and stories stick.
Correct, correct, correct. Lovely. Very interesting point there, Preeti. And you know, the fact that a lot of the fact that this space does not even recognize this as a tangible skill, let alone learnable skill, is something that must be spoken about a lot more. Because as we unpack this subject, I think this has been the most convenient conversation in establishing the importance of stories, because from a neuroscience perspective it's important, from an emotions perspective, human connections space, this is important, from your own experience and relatability perspective it's important, the retention is much greater, the experience is much richer, the fact that you can retrieve anything based on story. I remember I was not a science student, but some of my really close friends were science students who learned this periodic table, and they had this really funny, slangish, sort of a poetic thing around it that helped them with the initials of the periodic table. And in some beautiful way, they ratified it and they could retrieve that memory, right? even that's like a beautifully articulated story, poem, whatever you may want to say. The fact is that if this medium is so strong, then why is it not tangibilized and offered in the training space? And if it isn't, that's where people like you and me come in to curate, offerings where one is able to break down the what, how, why of it, and then lace it and grace it with a lot of experience and role play and immersive possibilities, and then offer it as a training experience. Because like you were saying, that teachers who teach from their experience, teachers who share from their experience, teachers who narrate stories from their own personal lives, that whole thing, what was coming to my mind is that's what a mentor is, right? Somebody who's done it before, somebody who's struggled through it, somebody who's overcome a challenge, right? And even as trainers, as somebody who's wanting to impact this space, that's exactly what we've done, right? The moment I bring you on or you talk to me, and the fact that we can touch upon the science, the math, the human angle, the English, the Hindi of it, just goes to show that one has experienced it. And if there is enough curiosity in the subject per se, which you and I have in the science of learning and the art of teaching, right? That's what we are unpacking here. So what comes to my mind is that, along with the importance of the subject per se, which we've already established, we also need to unpack the need for enough material and enough community support and mentors in the space for you to be able to grasp these skills. Because these 25 days, we're not just talking about the skills that are important, but how do you build on them? One is you instinctively, intuitively build on them because you are a brilliant teacher, which a lot of our teachers are, because they're super hardworking and they invest a lot of time and effort in preparing their lesson plans. But two things that I want to put out here is formally accepting it is a medium of rich medium of learning and sharing. And secondly, this is a call out to all the administrative policymakers and all people of influence to make the whole structure more flexible, to allow for these innovative ways of bringing in lesson plans, which a lot of progressive futuristic schools are doing. But the mainstream education system still needs to adapt. Because I think in all conversation, at the end of most of the days of conversations that I have with you, Preeti, what I feel is that teachers end up playing the catch up game. There's a whole burden, like a tokra of the syllabus that you need to finish up, and then there is this amazing innovative creative brilliance flowing through these life wires that they need to ground. And how do you bridge these two? Now here is like this solid blob of syllabus which is calling out to me, and here are these children bubbling with energy and wanting to experience and wanting to do more. I know that there is alternative schooling available, I know that there are alternative mediums available. The point is that alternate needs to become mainstream. And last but not the least, Indian education system was always that. We were always a community based, experiential, immersive sort of an education system. So these are some thoughts that come to my mind as we come to the end of this conversation. What is it that you'd like to wrap this whole conversation with?
So, I think when we talk about how do we bridge the gap, yes, stories are fantastic. We don't have to become professional storytellers, right? If we can come up with incorporating um, experiences, practical application, and simply informing our students about where what they're learning is going to apply, right? I think that itself will go a long way. Just going into the story of the why before you go into the how. right?
Yeah.
The way the mind perceives information, learns something, is always first is what is this? If you look at very young children, when they're just born, first couple of years, all that we're teaching them is the what of things. What is this? It's a chair. What color is this? It's red. What is that? So everything that we're talking about for children, and even children will ask you just what questions.
Yeah.
ये क्या है?
Ah,
Do? Right? The only question they will ask is what? Because the first thing that they need to do is to understand what is around them.
correct.
And the next question is why.
Mm-hmm.
There will be a stage once they're past this what stage comes the why stage. Why should I brush my teeth? Why should I wear my clothes? Why should I take a bath? Why should I do my homework? Why is it that you're sitting home? I have to go to school. मतलब हर चीज के लिए why.
Yeah.
Now they're coming to a place to understand why are things the way they are. Without understanding the why, the mind cannot process how. Even in the corporate space, right? You get a project. The
Absolutely.
first
Yeah.
thing you do is to ask, what is this project about?
Mm-hmm.
What is the goal of the project? Why is this the goal? Once you
Or why
know
is
the
it
what of it,
important?
you
Yeah.
want to know why. Why is this important? Why is this significant? Why did they choose me? Why now? Why do you need this outcome?
Mm-hmm.
It is only after you have clarity on the what and why can you actually put down a solid how to solve that problem. Human evolution, human child development also follows the same category. The learning process also follows the same sequence. We need to first introduce children to what are we doing today? Why is this important?
And then let's get to how.
And then talk about how are we going to be doing. That itself is a story by itself.
Yeah, if it's narrated like that.
It is possible
Yeah.
to, is all I
It is, and it's a great starting point. And
Yes, and it
that's
doesn't have
enough.
to be a, all the examples that I'm giving from my school, I've never stepped into an alternate school, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had the blessing of those one, two, three teachers who stood out because
Correct.
they cared enough to bring in those stories, either humanizing the subject or humanizing the teacher themselves, right? I'm sure we can do this in any school, anywhere, any context, a tuition teacher. It doesn't matter where. All that matters is the intention to do it. How my job is to, okay, today I have to finish this and I just need to go into the. Or are you just checking off a to do list? Or are you bringing in your passion, your love for the subject? One of the things that I would definitely like to close this conversation with is your students will learn a lot more
Hmm.
from your love for the subject,
Yeah.
which sparks a curiosity for what you've got to say, than any facts, any great theorems that you're going to ever teach. Right? It's
Yeah. Yeah.
not the what, it's the stories. It's not the facts, it's the stories.
Yeah.
That's where I
Yeah.
would
No,
close.
absolutely. And that takes me to the brilliant words of our common teacher, Blair Singer, that it's not the content, it's the context.
Yes.
It's not what you teach, it's how you teach. And at the core of all of it is why, in the first place, are you there in that classroom? And my only wish as we close this and hope and wish is that more and more teachers, rather than those one or two teachers that we remember, I wish that the whole system shifts to a place where it's all the teachers and it's most of the teachers who bring in this kind of learning. We have been talking about how stretched they are administratively, emotionally, and work wise, and so much that they can do to center themselves, ground themselves, because they are the initial heroes and the first role models that we look up to. And in this series, we'll keep coming up with more themes, subjects, and topics. Like we're working on a whole aspect where we're going to bring in technology and digitization. Then there's a whole conversation on alternate schools and alternate mediums of learning. Then there is a whole conversation about primary, middle school, and senior school, the difference in approaches that you need to apply on. These are some themes that we are looking at, But as we close this conversation, we invite more and more audience to come up with their thoughts, questions, suggestions on what all can we incorporate as we go on with the series for another 13 days. So 13, 14 days, yeah. With this, I'll wrap for today. Thank you so much, Preeti, for all your inputs. Thank you, audience, who've stayed with us for this long. And we'll come back and see you again this week with a new topic. Thank
Yes.
you. Bye bye.
Take care. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.